Friends, here we are. This is segment 4, and I hope you've had a chance to listen to the 3 that come before this. And thank you if you have. And if you haven't, go back and pick it up from the beginning. But you've been hearing us talk about what has been going on globally in the United Methodist Church in terms of conferencing, general conferences. But I think right now, let's pull it back in to our own story during this time. And it really began before we went to Kansas City.
Yeah, I think a little bit of a timeline might be helpful.
Yeah.
I'll get it started, but guys, help me out with this. So you all remember that after the 2016 General Conference, there was from that a called General Conference scheduled for February of 2019. Yeah. And this called General Conference had a one agenda item, one focus for that General Conference, and it was around the Book of Discipline, LGBTQ plus inclusion, and the state of the church in relationship to that inclusion.
And much like the 2 pieces of legislation we've talked about in the other 2 sections, this called General Conference had multiple pieces of legislation come up, but 3 in particular that were going to be voted on, one of which was called the One Church Plan.
Which was the expected legislation to pass through that. In fact, in the fall of 2018, we had retired Bishop Charlene Kammerer came and spoke at Central and talked about the legislation and talked about her support for the One Church Plan and how she really believed, from talking to other bishops and folks around the General Conference, that it would pass.
What was the core idea of the One Church Plan? Or hope of it.
Yeah, so the idea behind the One Church Plan was that it recognized the diversity of the Methodist Church around LGBTQ inclusion, both the ordination and marriage, and offered the opportunity for the United Methodist Church to remain one church and have folks believe differently across the denomination around that discussion, and allowed for local churches and pastors and annual conferences to have a church on one side, one street that maybe wouldn't have a marriage or a wedding or a pastor who's LGBTQ, but the church right across the street could, and they're both United Methodists. So that was kind of the lead up to 2019, and as you all may remember, the 2019 General Conference, the One Church Plan did not pass. In fact, the plan that did pass doubled down on our language in the Book of Discipline that is not inclusive, and also put in more punitive penalties for pastors who were to perform weddings of persons who are LGBTQ, and really was very harsh language went into our Book of Discipline that wasn't there previously. And that was not the expected outcome of General Conference 2019, but that was what happened. And about 7 to 10 days later, we had a response from our ad board as our church. And Patrick, if you'll talk just a little bit about that.
Yeah, and so directly after that called General Conference, we got together with the ad board, and Central put out a statement saying kind of who we were and what we believed, and that's where you've seen this everyone without exception banner, and we got billboards up around town. We got things in the Citizen Times and in other places, and that was unanimously supported by our administrative board as a way to say, this is who we are as the people called Central, and what we believe, because at the time we were seeing from multiple news outlets across the country, the Methodist Church is splitting. The Methodist Church doubles down on homophobia and X, Y, and Z, headlines like this. And so in response to that, our ad board chose to represent our church in a way that we saw as who we were and kind of our core identity.
So then that led to discussions. Where do we go next? And there was certainly many people wanting to have more of a discussion, and after a lot of prayerful planning and thoughtfulness, we thought we're going to give every opportunity for the people of Central to be a part of the discussion. So, Luke, you and I, with the help and support of others, decided to have what did we decide to do?
We had what we called the listening sessions.
Right.
We recognized we started those not during the summer, but in the fall of 2019.
Right.
We started listening sessions both here at church, but we really wanted to have it. Most of them were in folks' homes.
Right.
And it really was a listening session. Part of what we did is that, Rob, you and I shared clarity about what was passed and what wasn't passed at General Conference. But then we listened to the congregation share about how it felt to be Methodist this year, what our feelings are as a congregation around the legislation that did pass, what we might prefer. What were your impressions of those?
Well, the thing that I think everybody felt good about, I hope they did, is there was open and honest discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we had 30-something meetings, probably reached around 350 people. And I would say a couple things came out clearly, that the people of Central, overall, the overall consensus was wanted to remain United Methodist, and inclusiveness was an important value.
Steve's a layperson, thinking back to both those experiences in the fall of 2019, but also, our trip to Kansas and this prompted these videos. How does that?
Sure. Well, calls me back to Kansas City when I shared what we had done in the listening sessions. I didn't hear anything close to that had happened in any other churches, and I caught folks musing about their own churches and where they thought their people stood, but none of them had ever actually had the hard conversations that we had.
And so just to follow anything else you want to say about listening sessions, Rob? Just to follow our timeline, the listening sessions ended sometime late October. Our ad board met, and what we determined from the listening sessions is by then we knew that the protocol, which we talked about in a previous video, would potentially come before the 2020 regularly scheduled General Conference. And we recognized that we had learned all this. We had learned about who we were and who we are from our listening sessions, and we needed a committee to help guide our ad board, help inform our ad board going forward as we prepared for the May 2020 General Conference. So out of our ad board, we formed what we called a guidance committee, and this is a committee that would really pay attention to the legislation, has read all the pages, and that committee met for about 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then March of 2020, something happened.
The pandemic. Our last time meeting together as a congregation was March 8th.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
During that, now we've been back meeting.
Sure, but
right.
And the May 2020 General Conference was postponed.
Yeah, and we've made, Rob and Luke made a video that outlined the listening sessions and the creation of this committee, and very similar to how our trustees have functioned during the pandemic. They've watched all the things coming out from the CDC and made informed decisions. That's kind of how this guidance committee was going to function. It was going to stay abreast of all the legislation and kind of help make an informed decision depending on where legislation came down, and obviously that hasn't happened. And so I think that one of the reasons we're doing this is to kind of ask the question, well, why are we still talking about all of this, right? I mean, at this point, you've watched all the videos and you've heard the history, and so you could almost say, well, why are we still having this discussion? It sounds like you've been doing a lot of work, and that's true, but there's still a lot left to be done, and a lot of uncertainty ahead of us.
I think it's important that the people of Central have the opportunity to know. And that's what we've tried to, if you look, that's why it's good playing the timeline. Mm-hmm. Every step of the way, I think we've wanted everyone that wanted to be included in the conversation to be included and to have the same information that those of us that have been to places like Kansas City have. So.
And we've shared, obviously, I mean, anytime you share about something, you share your interpretation, right? And so, but we've also shared all the documents so that folks can read them at home. And And I think Rob's right. I think part of the reason we're still talking about this is because it's important. It's because it shows that we are paying attention to the denomination that we're a part of and recognizing the implications that it could have for our local church and making sure that none of us are caught off guard. And we still might be, because we were in 2019 when the one church plan didn't pass, but at least we're prepared for whatever might happen.
So where do we go from here after these, the videos that we've made and the conferences we've gone to and the steps we've already taken? How do we continue to not only be abreast of all the situations happening in the Methodist Church, but continue to live out our mission as Central here in Asheville, and continue? What does that look like for us?
Well, I like what Steve said, I think, in our first session about, I think he was moved by the promise and possibility of a denomination that still wanted to move into a future with a sense of not just surviving, but thriving and doing everything we can to honor our Wesleyan heritage, but also to create it in a new and vibrant way for the 21st century.
I mean, why are we doing it? There's still a lot of important decisions to be made.
Yeah.
Yeah, and where do we go from here? I think part of the reason to put out these videos is to make sure all the information's out there. I think it's also to put it out there so that we can focus on the day-to-day living out of our mission, which we have done. I mean, one of the things you said, Rob, after the initial kind of, just blowback of what the pandemic's been, is that we have continued day in and day out, month in and month out, as a church to try to do our best to be in ministry and mission and follow the lead of the Spirit and the work of Christ in the world. And I think part of putting this out there is it needs to be out there, and we need to be paying attention. And also we're doing it so that we can keep doing the things we're doing day in and day out.
Yeah.
Right. I'm grateful that we have a church that's going to be willing to listen and to be in this with us. Right.
Well, I know that you've followed us this far, and if you go back to any of the videos down below will be links to any of the web pages we've talked about, whether it's one about the protocol or the Christmas covenant, but also know that you can reach out to any of the four of us. Sorry, Steve, I'll put you out there for that. But
I can take it.
any of your pastoral staff would love to talk about this question.
But particularly Steve. I'm just kidding.
But at the end of the day,
Thanks, guys.
we're going to continue to move forward as the people of Central. We're going to continue to do the good work in the world, and I think that that's important. And you guys are important in doing that work.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all.